A few days ago, the Albani Center in Jordan was closed by religious authorities. The reason they gave was that the teachings of this center went against the prevailing religious thought in Jordanian society, and it undermined the quote-unquote national unity and moderation of Jordan. In this video, I want to try to address two important questions in regards to this. The first of whether Sheikh Al-Albani himself was an extremist, and the second is what this closing of his institution actually tells us about religious authority, the Salafi-Sufi debates, and freedom of thought. Before I answer those questions, I wanted to give a brief background of Sheikh Al-Albani and his students in the center. A few days ago, I actually uploaded a video that detailed the controversies of Sheikh Al-Albani's life. So here I'll just give a brief overview. Sheikh Nasruddin Al-Albani was born in Albania. With the rise of secularism in Albania, his father chose to move his family to Syria. Sheikh Al-Albani grows up in Syria, starts learning, reading books, and he encounters the science of hadith, becomes an avid reader, and adopts what is known as Salafism today. He's living among Hanafis and Madhabists in Syria. He begins clashing with them about whether one should follow the Quran and the Sunnah or whether one should follow the Hanafi Madhab. Now, Albani eventually leaves Syria, goes to Saudi Arabia, and there he also clashes with Saudi Arabian scholars over, again, the same question of whether one should follow the Quran and Sunnah or Wahhabism or the Hanbali Madhab. Eventually, Sheikh Al-Albani finds a home in Jordan where he spent most of his life, where he taught, and where he eventually died and was buried. The Al-Albani Center in Jordan was actually not established by Sheikh Al-Albani himself. It was established by his students after he passed in an effort to preserve his teachings, conduct research following Sheikh Al-Albani's methodology, propagate Salafi da'wah in Jordan and online. Now, the question of was Sheikh Al-Albani himself an extremist? It's important to note that the Jordanian authorities didn't close the center for extremism. That wasn't a reason they cited in their reasoning for closing the center. Rather, they said it went against the Jordanian national trends or norms. So this is problematic because Salafism has actually been part of Jordanian religious norms. Whether one agrees with it or not, Salafism has been in Jordan since the mid-1900s, especially with Sheikh Al-Albani in Jordan. It's always been a part of it. So what we are perhaps seeing is that there is perhaps a group of people who are in authority who dislike Salafism and kind of use that to crack down on dissent. Salafism has always been part of Jordanian religious movements and trends. Sheikh Al-Albani has lived there since the 1990s, taught there, again, had students there, gave classes there, was buried there. And after him, we have his students who continued carrying on. There's no evidence of real political or threat or violence or anything like this. What it really perhaps means is that Salafis, they tend to sometimes be a little bit, harsh or straightforward or blunt in their defending or propagating of their Salafism. However, this is different than extremism. And Sheikh Al-Albani himself was living in a time in Jordan where his movement grew to an extent that it rivaled the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood was the largest movement in Jordan in the 1990s. In this environment, what's interesting is that Sheikh Al-Albani had very zealous students who came to him, and before coming to him, they were debating people from the Muslim Brotherhood. They were debating people who follow the madhab. They were essentially taking Sheikh Al-Albani's ideas and going out and doing what young students do. They're going to go out and debate and argue and so on. So they used to come to Sheikh Al-Albani and they asked him to, not explicitly, but they were pushing him to do takfir of certain people from the Muslim Brotherhood, especially Sayyid Qutb. So in one particular incident, they are pressing him and, kind of indicating that, hey, we want you, he's a kafir, that Sayyid Qutb, someone like Sayyid Qutb is a kafir. And Sheikh Al-Albani gets very angry with them, and he says to them, basically, stop it. If you are asking me to do takfir of Sayyid Qutb, then I am not of those who do takfir. He says he is a man, about Sayyid Qutb, who was a writer, who made some mistakes, and that's it. He kind of leaves it at that. So this is an indication that Sheikh Al-Albani was not someone who was out to, do takfir and cause disunity. Now, what makes Salafis and Sheikh Al-Albani especially controversial? It's really their unconventional methodology and unconventional opinions. Now, because something is unconventional does not mean it is extremist and does not mean it needs to be dissented. So what makes it unconventional? So Sheikh Al-Albani, his primary way of deciding whether something was part of Islamic law or not is almost entirely based on the authenticity of a hadith. If he finds a hadith that is authentic and it says something and he understands what it says, for him that's it, this is law. Scholars who we can call traditionalists, who followed a madhab, they also took into consideration whether a hadith was authentic or not. This is also important for them. However, that was not the only criteria. They had a larger framework of approaching Islamic law. Now, because Sheikh Al-Albani, he had these unconventional views or unconventional methodology, it did lead him at times to unconventional opinions that even some Salafis themselves responded to him on or disagreed with him on. An example of this is his prohibition of circular gold for women. Now, Sheikh Al-Albani, he had these unconventional views, but again, it doesn't take away from, or it doesn't necessarily lead to extremism or something along those lines. Now, what are the larger implications from the closing of this center? I want to kind of step back and kind of look at what's happening in terms of the closing or dissent in the Muslim world. So if we go, for example, to Saudi Arabia, there is a strong suppression of any kind of expression of Sufism. If there's someone in Saudi Arabia, for example, who wants to do a mawlid, that is suppressed, that needs to be done kind of behind the scenes, in someone's home, hidden from authorities. And this is, in my view, not necessarily a good thing. So what we are seeing in Jordan is perhaps something similar, that maybe someone in the Ministry of Education or something like this affiliates himself with the traditionalist trend or Sufism or Madhabism, doesn't like Salafism, doesn't agree with Salafism, and uses that position of authority to close down the center and opposing opinions. And this is just an observation, but we Salafism and Sufism, both of these movements and Madhabism and whatnot, they've really in Islamic history have never been identity markers. For example, the idea of following the Salaf is just an idea, that I am trying to follow the Sahaba, I'm trying to follow the first three generations. We see today that it became a way of dress, a movement, a political thought. So the Salafis typically dress, for example, in the short thobe and the beard and so on. And perhaps we see Sufism doing almost the same thing, where in the past, following a madhab or being a Sufi was simply just something you do. It was something spiritual, it was something intellectual. We see today, perhaps almost a response to Salafism, that Sufism is becoming almost an identity marker itself, where Sufis now identify themselves almost by their dress, the shawl, the kuhul in the eyes, sometimes the stick, or the gathering with the bakhur and all of these things. These are identity markers, almost in a way to say, hey, I am a Muslim, and my Islam is one that prioritizes the madhab and Sufism and spirituality. I am different than the Salafi. Again, I'm not saying these are good or bad things, but it's just an observation of how movements and ideas kind of grow. And then there's these two competing movements that we see in the Muslim world of Salafism and traditionalism and Sufism. What do we ultimately take away with that? What do I take away from this? Is that there's no problem with having a view on Islam as long as your view is not causing people physical harm. There's no problem with having this view, and this view should be allowed to exist. And it should be, if you disagree with it, there should be room to debate and interpret this. It should never be used to enforce law to close down dissent. And the best example of this is Imam Malik himself. After he finished writing his Muwatta, and for context, it took Imam Malik about 40 years to write this, because when Imam al-Shafi'i came and he memorized it in a few days, Imam Malik said to him, you haven't understood it. It took me 40 years to write this, right? So it took him this long to write it, meaning Imam Malik he did his utmost research. He poured his life into this work of the Muwatta. He believed it to be the best understanding of Islam according to his entire life's effort. And he is Imam Malik, the Imam of Medina. The government at the time, they came to Imam Malik and they said, hey, this is a great book you have, the Muwatta. We trust you. You've put in all this effort. Let's make it law. Let's make the Muwatta law. Imam Malik, out of his wisdom, he said no, he refused. This was the perfect opportunity for Imam Malik to shut down all opposing opinions. Everyone who he sincerely believed had an incorrect interpretation of Islam. Rather, Imam Malik, he refused, and he said, no, this is my understanding of Islamic law. There are other interpretations out there that, of course, he doesn't agree with, because otherwise he would have put them in his Muwatta. And these, he allowed them to flourish. So to conclude, there's really nothing wrong with having identity markers in the Muslim community. There's nothing wrong with someone identifying himself as a Salafi or a traditionalist or Sufi or whatever you want to call it, and even dress like that. Follow a certain way of dress. There's nothing inherently wrong with this. Rather, it actually beautifies Islam and it beautifies the Muslim community. However, these identity markers should not lead to hatred within the Muslim community. There should always be space for dissenting opinions, even when you passionately disagree, that the dissenting opinion should be allowed to exist. If we look at Islamic history, ikhtilaf was always there. You will never resolve the opinions or the differences between different madhabs or the Salafi and the Ash'ari or anything else. These opinions were always there and they will always be there, and no one will come today and completely resolve these and make the entire ummah follow a single way. Rather, what I'm trying to point out here is the danger and the problematic outcomes of using law to close down and shut down dissenting opinions, whether they be Salafi or Sufi or anything else. These opinions should be allowed to exist and be dealt with respectful disagreement, dissent, and scholarship.